The desert does not end when the sun disappears. It transforms. As the last light slips below the horizon, the heat that once pressed down on the sand begins to drain away, leaving behind a surface that cools and hardens with unsettling speed. The air grows thinner. Sounds travel farther. Every movement, no matter how small, feels exposed. By day, the desert is honest. Tracks remain visible. Carcasses lie where they fall. Predators and prey move within clear boundaries of distance and light. But night removes those boundaries. Shapes lose definition. Depth becomes uncertain. What was once seen must now be sensed. Wind slides low across the ground, carrying dust scent and fragments of information that only nocturnal lives know how to read. Somewhere beneath the sand, small bodies shift but do not emerge. Burrows remain sealed longer than usual. The desert is awake yet restrained, as if waiting for something to finish before anything else begins. In this darkness, survival is no longer governed by speed or strength. It is governed by timing. When to move, when to wait, when to abandon what was once valuable. A single mistake after nightfall can linger far longer than the mistake itself, attracting attention that the desert does not forgive. There are no dramatic pursuits here. No sudden clashes. Instead, there are gaps. Places where something should be, but isn't. Scents that fade too quickly. Signs of death that do not last until morning. These absences shape the behavior of every animal that must decide whether it is safe to step into the open. Insects hesitate before gathering. Small mammals test the air and retreat. Even experienced hunters avoid returning to familiar sites. Not because danger is visible, but because the night carries uncertainty that cannot be measured. In the desert, what happens after a kill can be as dangerous as the hunt itself. This is the part of the ecosystem most rarely seen. The hours when no one is watching, yet everything is being decided. When the desert quietly resets itself, removing what cannot be allowed to remain. When balance is maintained not through confrontation, but through disappearance. Night here is not empty time, it is a filter. A phase where consequences are sorted and risks are erased before they spread. And somewhere within this system moves a presence that does not need to announce itself to matter. It does not chase or fight. It does not claim territory in obvious ways. Its influence is felt through what is gone by dawn. Before the sun rises again, the desert will have already decided what carries over into the next day and what does not. When night fully settles over the desert, the animal that begins to move is rarely the one most people imagine. It does not race across open ground or announce itself with sound. Instead, it advances slowly, almost cautiously, its presence defined more by persistence than power. This is the striped hyena, an animal shaped not to dominate the desert, but to endure it. At first glance, the striped hyena seems poorly suited for a harsh environment. Its body is neither especially large nor built for speed. Its limbs are sturdy, but unremarkable. Its movements deliberate rather than explosive. The mane that runs along its back can rise in moments of tension, but most of the time it remains flat, blending into the animal's muted silhouette. There is nothing theatrical about the way it moves. That restraint is precisely what allows it to survive. Unlike apex predators that rely on strength and confrontation, striped hyenas occupy a quieter role in the desert hierarchy. They rarely hunt healthy prey. They avoid unnecessary conflict. Where other carnivores expend energy competing for dominance, striped hyenas conserve it. In an environment where calories are scarce and mistakes are costly, efficiency becomes the most reliable strategy. Their senses are tuned not to pursuit, but to aftermath. The striped hyena reads the desert through scent and memory, tracing faint chemical signals left behind by struggle, exhaustion, and death. It does not need to witness a hunt to benefit from it. It arrives later when the danger has passed and the winners have moved on. What remains is opportunity, but also risk. This position places the striped hyena at a critical point in the ecosystem. It feeds on what others leave behind, including parts that most scavengers cannot process. Its powerful jaws can crush dense bone and dried hide, allowing it to access nutrients locked away from less specialized animals. In doing so, it removes material that would otherwise linger decay and attract growing numbers of insects and pathogens. The striped hyena's territory is not defined by borders or displays of force. It is defined by patterns. Routes repeated over years, sites revisited not because they are guaranteed, but because history suggests possibility. The desert rewards those who remember where death tends to occur. Memory here is as valuable as strength. Through this behavior, striped hyenas quietly regulate the night. They shorten the lifespan of carcasses. They reduce the time during which danger accumulates. The desert remains unforgiving, but it does not become clogged with excess. Balance is preserved not through control, but through removal. This role gives striped hyenas an influence disproportionate to their visibility. Other animals do not need to encounter them directly. The knowledge that remains will not last changes decisions long before any contact occurs. Feeding sites become temporary. Movement becomes cautious. The night grows leaner, more controlled. The striped hyena does not claim authority over the desert. It maintains its function. And in a landscape where survival depends on limiting risk as much as securing food, that function is indispensable. As darkness deepens, the desert begins to react long before the striped hyena is ever seen. Its influence travels ahead of it, carried by scent memory and learned caution. Across the landscape, animals adjust their behavior, not in response to a threat they can identify, but to a possibility they cannot ignore. Small nocturnal mammals are the first to change. Species that usually emerge soon after sunset remain underground, longer delaying their search for food. The decision costs energy, but it reduces exposure during the most uncertain hours of the night. A carcass that might have drawn insects and easy foraging no longer offers the same promise. What could have been a resource has become a question mark. Insects respond in quieter ways. Where remains are quickly removed, swarms fail to form. Without dense concentrations of flies or beetles, feeding opportunities scatter rather than cluster. This dispersion ripples outward through the food web. Animals that rely on predictable insect activity hesitate. Movement slows. The desert grows less efficient, but also less dangerous. Larger carnivores react with restraint rather than aggression. Predators that made a kill during daylight rarely linger after nightfall. Returning to a carcass carries increasing risk once the desert cools and scents travel farther. The striped hyena does not challenge them directly, but its arrival alters the cost of staying. A site that will not last is no longer worth defending. Leaving becomes the safer option. These changes create pockets of absence across the desert places, where activity fades earlier than expected. Paths go unused. Water sources fall quiet. The striped hyena does not enforce territory in the conventional sense. Instead, it introduces uncertainty. Animals do not know where it is, only that it could be nearby. That uncertainty reshapes movement more effectively than confrontation ever could. Over time, this indirect pressure becomes part of the desert's rhythm. Species that survive here learn that restraint can be protective. Acting too quickly, feeding too openly, or returning too often carries hidden costs. The night rewards those who minimize exposure rather than maximize gain. By the deepest hours of darkness, the ecosystem has settled into a leaner state. Fewer animals take risks. Fewer resources are contested. Energy is conserved not by abundance, but by avoidance. The striped hyena may never appear, yet its effect is everywhere. In the desert after dark, survival is shaped as much by what animals choose not to do as by what they attempt. And in that space of hesitation, the striped hyena exerts its quiet authority, guiding behavior without force and regulating life through absence rather than action. When a carcass remains in the desert, it becomes a temporary center of gravity. During the day, heat slows decay, preserving what is left behind. But once night falls, that pause ends. The striped hyena approaches without urgency, guided by scent and memory rather than sight. There is no rush. Time favors those who arrive last. Unlike scavengers that rely on aggression to secure access, the striped hyena feeds with methodical precision. Its jaws are built for what others abandon: thick hide dried by the sun, bones stripped of flesh fragments that carry more danger than nourishment. These remains, if left untouched, become breeding grounds for bacteria and parasites. They draw insects, concentrate risk, and turn a single death into a persistent hazard. As the hyena feeds, the carcass is reduced steadily, not torn apart in chaos, but dismantled piece by piece. Each minute shortens the window during which danger accumulates. Scents fade. Insects disperse. The sight loses its pull. What was once a focal point becomes neutral ground, again blending back into the desert's vastness. This quiet removal has consequences far beyond the moment of feeding. When carcasses disappear quickly, scavengers remain dispersed rather than crowded. Competition diminishes. Disease struggles to spread. Predators avoid the injuries that come from returning to old kills. The desert remains harsh, but it stays functional. What the striped hyena leaves behind is as important as what it consumes. Scattered bones provide minerals for smaller animals. Fragments buried by wind and movement enrich the soil, however sparsely. Even absence has value. In an ecosystem defined by scarcity, nothing is truly wasted, not even what vanishes. Through repetition, this behavior shapes the night. Each carcass removed shortens the lifespan of risk. Each feeding event prevents escalation. The striped hyena does not decide who dies. It decides how long death is allowed to matter. In the desert, after dark, that distinction is critical. Survival is not determined solely by the act of killing, but by the management of what follows. By controlling consequences rather than causes, the striped hyena exerts an influence that remains invisible yet constant, maintaining balance not through dominance, but through disappearance. As the night rhythms repeat across seasons, the survival of the striped hyena depends on continuity rather than intensity. Life in the desert does not allow for excess. Reproduction is cautious time to reduce exposure rather than to take advantage of abundance. In an environment where resources appear unpredictably, restraint becomes a strategy passed from one generation to the next. Dens are established in locations chosen for concealment, not convenience. Rock crevices, shallow caves, and abandoned burrows offer protection from heat, cold, and discovery. These spaces are rarely close to obvious food sources. Distance is intentional. By separating shelter from opportunity, striped hyenas reduce the chance that their most vulnerable stage of life will be drawn into danger. Young hyenas are born into darkness and remain there for long periods. Early movement is limited. Noise is minimal. Learning begins before independence, shaped by repetition rather than exploration. Scent becomes the first language. Cubs are exposed to the smells of decay, stone dust, and dry air long before they understand distance or direction. These early cues form the foundation of how they will later navigate the desert. Parental investment is measured, not dramatic. Food arrives irregularly, reflecting the realities of scavenging, rather than the certainty of hunting. This unpredictability conditions the young to expect absence as often as presence. Survival does not depend on being fed quickly, but on enduring the spaces in between. In the desert, patience is as necessary as nourishment. As the young grow, their movements expand cautiously. Short excursions from the den become longer routes traced repeatedly until they are memorized. The desert is vast, but striped hyenas do not treat it as open territory. They move through it along familiar lines, guided by past outcomes rather than curiosity. Places associated with risk are avoided. Places where opportunity has appeared before are revisited, but never assumed to be safe. This upbringing produces adults that are efficient rather than aggressive. Striped hyenas mature into animals that minimize confrontation, conserve energy, and avoid predictability. They do not compete for dominance because dominance invites injury. They do not linger because lingering concentrates danger. Their success lies in consistency. Across generations, this strategy allows striped hyenas to persist where more forceful approaches fail. They do not overwhelm the desert. They adapt to it. By raising young that inherit restraint rather than recklessness, the species maintains its role as a stabilizing presence, one that quietly supports the balance of life without ever drawing attention to itself. The true weight of the striped hyena's role becomes visible only when pressure pushes the desert beyond its limits. During periods of drought, conflict, or sudden loss, the system that once absorbed death quietly begins to strain. It is here at the edge of collapse that the absence or presence of this scavenger reshapes the night most dramatically. When striped hyenas are reduced or driven away, carcasses persist longer in the open. Heat preserves them during the day and without systematic removal. After dark, they accumulate into sources of contamination. Insects gather in dense numbers. Bacteria multiply unchecked. What should have been a brief moment in the cycle of life becomes a lingering threat that spreads outward through contact and proximity. Other scavengers respond quickly, drawn to the same remains. Competition intensifies. Feeding sites become crowded, predictable, and dangerous. Fights break out where there were none before. Injuries increase, and with them, infection. Predators linger longer than they should, returning repeatedly to the same locations, exposing themselves to risks that efficiency once avoided. Small animals feel the shift almost immediately. Concentrated insect populations alter foraging routes. Rodents take greater risks, drawn toward resources that promise food but deliver disease. Movement patterns tighten around a shrinking number of sites, increasing overlap between species that would normally remain separated. The desert's carefully spaced rhythm begins to compress. Environmental stress magnifies these effects. During drought, water sources become focal points not only for life, but for decay. Without scavengers to limit buildup nearby, contamination spreads faster. Feeding grounds lose their neutrality. What was once temporary becomes persistent, and persistence in the desert is rarely survivable. In this altered state, survival grows harsher rather than simpler. Energy that once went toward endurance is redirected into conflict and recovery. Mortality rises quietly without spectacle, driven not by a single predator, but by imbalance. The desert becomes louder, busier, and more dangerous, not because it has gained a new threat, but because it has lost a regulator. The striped hyena never needed to dominate to matter. Its contribution was containment. By shortening the lifespan of death, it prevented escalation. When that function weakens, the desert reveals how dependent it was on an animal that rarely demanded attention. Here, the greatest challenge is not an enemy with teeth or claws, but excess, too much decay, too much concentration, too many consequences allowed to linger. In the desert, survival depends on limits, and few creatures enforce those limits as quietly or as effectively as the striped hyena. As the first light spreads across the desert, the night leaves behind almost no evidence of what it decided. The sand appears undisturbed. The air is clean. Whatever dangers existed hours earlier have been absorbed and erased, folded back into the landscape without ceremony. This is how balance survives in a place that offers no mercy. By dawn, the striped hyena is already gone. It does not remain to defend territory or revisit what it has removed. Its work is finished before the day begins. What could have drawn conflict, disease, or overcrowding has been reduced to silence. The desert is harsh, but it is functional. Life can continue without unnecessary risk. In ecosystems defined by scarcity, survival depends not on excess, but on restraint. Every death carries the potential to destabilize what little remains. The striped hyena exists to shorten that window of danger, ensuring that consequences do not outlive necessity. It protects animals that will never encounter it and supports processes that extend far beyond a single species. This is not power that demands attention. It does not announce itself through speed, strength, or sound. It operates after the moment most remember, shaping what follows rather than what precedes. And yet without it, the desert would be heavier, more crowded, and far more dangerous than it appears. The striped hyena does not decide who dies. That is left to hunger, chance, and the unforgiving conditions of the desert. What it decides is what remains afterward. In a landscape where survival is measured by limits, that distinction defines everything. When night falls again, the cycle will repeat. Once more, an animal almost never seen will determine how much of the past is allowed to carry forward and how much must disappear for life to endure.